Rome, the eternal city. A civilization that built roads, laws, aqueducts, and armies that conquered the known world. But behind the marble temples and triumphal arches, behind the legions marching in disciplined silence, there lurked something darker. A hidden world of forbidden desires, where the most powerful men on earth indulged in lust, cruelty, and perversion, shielded by crowns of laurel and the unquestioned power of empire. And among them all, one name stands above the rest: Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known to history by a nickname whispered in both awe and fear: Caligula. To some, he was a madman. To others, a monster. To all, he was Rome's most perverted emperor. Caligula's reign lasted only 4 short years, from 37 to 41 CE. But in that time, he shocked the empire with acts so twisted, so scandalous, that 2,000 years later, his name still echoes as a warning of what happens when lust, cruelty, and absolute power collide. This is the story of Caligula, a tale of madness, perversion, and the dark side of empire. Stay with me as we descend into the shadows of ancient Rome. Part 1. The Making of a Monster. To understand Caligula's perversions, we must first step into the shadows of his childhood, where innocence and tragedy intertwined. Born in 12 CE, Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, later known to history as Caligula, entered a world of grandeur, ceremony, and deadly politics. His father, Germanicus, was beloved by the people, a general whose victories in Germania made him the jewel of Rome. Yet even in that glory, danger lurked. As a child, Gaius accompanied his father on military campaigns. He wore miniature boots, and soldiers affectionately nicknamed him Caligula, Little Boots. What seemed a harmless nickname belied the harsh realities that shaped the boy. From the first steps he took among soldiers, Gaius learned that admiration could be fleeting, and that loyalty was often a mask for envy and betrayal. Tragedy struck early. Germanicus died under mysterious circumstances, rumored to have been poisoned by rivals seeking to weaken his family. Gaius's mother, Agrippina the Elder, was exiled, watched by the suspicious eyes of Emperor Tiberius. His siblings were not spared, executed, imprisoned, or driven to despair. In these formative years, Gaius witnessed the cruelty of power firsthand, a world where love, family, and even innocence could be sacrificed at the altar of ambition. By the time he reached adulthood, Gaius had internalized a singular truth. In Rome, power was the only law that mattered, and the price of weakness was death. He would need every ounce of cunning, charisma, and ruthlessness to survive. When Tiberius finally died in 37 CE, the young Gaius ascended the throne. The people cheered, the Senate hoped for stability, and for a brief moment, Rome glimpsed a golden age. But beneath the veneer of charm and vigor lurked the first signs of a darker nature, a hunger for control, for indulgence, and for absolute dominance that would soon cast a shadow over the eternal city. Part 2. Caligula's Descent into Lust. Caligula's early rule promised hope, but within months, whispers of forbidden pleasure began.
Banquets became stages for his whims. Noblewomen, senators, and courtiers were drawn into performances of seduction and submission. Every selection, every command was a display of power, proof that in Rome the emperor's desire outweighed all else. His love for his sisters, especially Drusilla, scandalized the empire. In a society where incest was abhorrent, he flaunted it openly. Some say his devotion teetered on obsession, a dangerous, intoxicating mix of passion and control. But lust alone wasn't enough. Caligula wielded desire as a weapon. Humiliation became erotic. Noblemen whose wives he seduced, senators whose daughters he displayed, each became a reminder that the emperor's pleasure was law. Even sacred spaces were not spared. Temples became stages for provocation. Statues of gods bore witness to acts that blurred devotion and indulgence. In every corner, Caligula stamped his mark, not just as a ruler, but as a living god, demanding obedience through the most intimate of human experiences.
Part 3. Orgies of Power. Rome's nights were no longer quiet. Under Caligula's reign, the imperial palace transformed into a stage of excess, indulgence, and terror. What had once been halls of governance and ceremony became labyrinths of shadowed chambers, flickering candlelight, and whispers of forbidden pleasures. Courtiers spoke in hushed tones of nights that stretched into dawn, where the city's elite, senators, generals, and noble families were drawn into performances of submission. Every banquet, every feast was more than a display of wealth. It was a demonstration of power, desire, and control. No one escaped the emperor's gaze. Those who refused to participate risked more than shame. Disobedience could mean death. Some accounts claim Caligula went further, building secret brothels inside the palace itself, not for ordinary women, but for Rome's aristocracy. Wives and daughters of the powerful were summoned, presented, and forced into acts of obedience. These were not merely sexual acts, they were tools of humiliation, a way to assert dominance over the empire's most influential families. In Caligula's world, lust and fear were inseparable. Even the sacred was not spared. Temples, once places of quiet reverence, became stages for the emperor's audacity. He paraded through holy halls, declaring himself a living god, demanding worship that now included indulgence in the pleasures of the flesh. Statues that once symbolized virtue and divine authority became silent witnesses to his acts, blurring the line between sacred devotion and human indulgence. Caligula's games were not only private, they were a spectacle for the empire. Nobles whispered in terror. As rumors spread, the emperor would select participants at whim, orchestrating nights of decadent excess that tested the boundaries of morality, power, and endurance. Every choice, every command sent a message. In his Rome, obedience was mandatory, morality was optional, and the emperor's desire was law. Power, lust, and spectacle became one. And in this theater of excess, Caligula did not merely assert his authority, he consumed it, entwining every desire with domination, leaving a trail of scandal that would echo through history for centuries to come. Part 4. Cruelty and Desire. Expanded. Caligula's lust was inseparable from cruelty. Pleasure and pain were intertwined in a dance that the empire could neither ignore nor escape. He did not love in quiet intimacy, he dominated in public spectacle.
Executions became entertainment. Citizens and nobles alike would gather or be forced to watch as lives ended for amusement, sometimes during banquets. The line between revelry and terror was gone. A sigh of delight could accompany the final gasp of a condemned man. Caligula watched it all with a twisted satisfaction, blending the sensual with the macabre. Marriages, once sacred unions, were manipulated like instruments. He forced men to witness the degradation of their wives and daughters, mocking their protests, laughter, or tears. Humiliation became an art form, and he was its master. Each act sent a clear message. In Caligula's Rome, the emperor's desire ruled supreme, and no law, no bond, and no tradition could stand against it. Even the Senate, Rome's pillar of dignity, became a playground for his whims. Senators, generals, and priests, once proud symbols of authority, were reduced to pawns in a game they could not win. Their dignity was stripped, their reputations tarnished, their lives bent to the emperor's amusement. The very structure of Roman government trembled under the weight of his excess. Yet there was a strange method to his madness. Caligula's cruelty was not mindless. It was a demonstration of absolute power. Desire and domination were intertwined, making every act a statement. The emperor alone dictated morality, pleasure, and punishment. Obedience was not just required, it was eroticized. Fear became intoxicating. Humiliation became a lure, and the shadow of his presence transformed Rome into a city of tension, awe, and terror. Palaces, temples, and gardens all bore witness. Spaces that once symbolized Rome's glory and virtue were now infused with scandal and desire. Caligula was both god and tormentor, master and predator. The empire itself became a reflection of his passions, a stage where lust, cruelty, and power collided in ways that would haunt history forever. In this world, intimacy was weaponized. Pleasure was punishment. Desire was control. And the emperor? He reigned not only with a crown, but with the knowledge that every human weakness, every secret longing, was his to command.
Part 5. The Breaking Point. By 40 CE, Rome's patience had been stretched to its limits. Caligula had drained the imperial treasury on lavish games, spectacles, and nights of indulgence. The Senate was humiliated, stripped of power, and fearful for their families. The people whispered of madness, that their emperor no longer saw himself as mortal, but divine. He demanded statues in his honor, even in distant Jerusalem. He forced senators to worship him as a god. And yet, it was not his arrogance alone that sowed the seeds of rebellion. It was the personal perversions and cruel acts that had corroded even the loyalty of those closest to him. The Praetorian Guard, sworn to protect the emperor, grew weary of the horrors they witnessed. The banquets, the humiliation, the twisted displays of lust and power. They could no longer stomach it. What had begun as awe and devotion had turned into disgust and fear. Behind the scenes, whispers of conspiracy spread like wildfire. The very men tasked with enforcing his will began to plot. They knew that in Caligula's Rome, survival depended on anticipating the next act of cruelty, and that the emperor's desires could strike anyone at any time. On January 24, 41 CE, the inevitable unfolded. Beneath the theater of the palace, within the shadows where power and secrecy collided, the Praetorian Guard struck. Steel pierced flesh. The god-emperor of lust, terror, and madness fell. He was 28 years old, young, powerful, yet undone by the very indulgences that had elevated him above all others. In death, Caligula became legend, not for victories or laws, nor for the splendor of Rome's architecture or military might, but for scandal, perversion, and the terrifying fusion of lust, cruelty, and absolute power. Rome endured. The empire survived. But the shadow of its most infamous emperor lingered, echoing through history, whispered in fear, fascination, and horror. His story became a warning. Even the most powerful, when consumed by desire and unchecked authority, can destroy themselves and those around them. And yet, fascination persists. The allure of scandal, the thrill of forbidden desire, the terror of absolute power, these are eternal. And in Caligula's story, all three intertwine, leaving a legacy as enduring as the city he once ruled. Conclusion: The legacy of perversion. Caligula's reign lasted just 4 years, yet he remains a symbol of scandal, lust, and cruelty. Historians still debate the truth. Were the orgies, incest, and grotesque spectacles exaggerated? Or did the emperor truly indulge in every human desire without restraint? Rome's empire endured, but Caligula transformed it. Temples became stages, palaces became dens. Senators and citizens learned that the emperor's pleasure outweighed all law. Beyond horror lies a lesson. Caligula was not simply a man consumed by lust. He was the product of a system that rewarded ambition and concentrated absolute power in one man. Empires rise and fall. Statues crumble. Legacies fade. But scandal survives. 2,000 years later, Caligula's name still whispers through history, a warning, a fascination, a dark reflection of desire fused with absolute power. This was the story of Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known as Caligula, Rome's most perverted emperor. A man whose lust, cruelty, and madness became legend, and whose legacy continues to haunt the eternal city.